Should you hope Jonathan Taylor falls to you, or should you hope someone takes him in front of you? That more this week on the couch. We got the big dog, Evan Silva, with us. What do you think, Jonathan Taylor? Do you want him to fall to you, or do you want him to you want someone to take him in front of you so you don't have to think about it?
That's the biggest conundrum in fantasy football as we sit here and speak. And I didn't know what to do at first, and I was like asking, Mike Leone and Adam Levitan, and I didn't know what to do. Like, do I move him down? Um, you know, like you said, should I hope that he falls to me? I would say that I kind of don't want any part of
Mm-hmm.
him right now, and it's nothing against him. It's just the situation that has arisen. First of all, I think that there was always going to be concern about Jonathan Taylor's role in the passing game. He the guy can catch, but the Colts are not going to throw the ball very often this season with Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson's statistics in terms of targeting running backs at Florida, I mean, minuscule percentage of his passes went to running backs. He's more of like a dual threat quarterback who can throw the football vertically. Um, there's just not going to be much pass volume in the Colts offense as a unit. So I was already a little bit down on him, and now the possibility of him missing games, I think I'm hoping that someone else takes him. I actually moved him down last night from I had him as the RB
Mm-hmm.
7, and I moved him down to the RB
That's exactly
12.
where I have him.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
really,
it's in
that's funny.
between
Yeah.
Najee Harris and Aaron Jones. We might disagree on which
Okay.
running, but it's like third
Right.
round. Like it would probably be
Mm-hmm.
late third round where I'd really, and that's
Yep.
where that drop off is. If you've been doing enough drafts, somewhere in the third round is where you feel like, ooh, the caliber of player drops a little bit, and it stays pretty level for the next 3 rounds. So you can get cute with it. You can take a swing for the fences where you might with Taylor, and you're right, Evan, about how this has changed, because I think 2-3 months ago, when you look at an injury discount, a player who was going number 1 or number 2 overall falling to the late first round, that
Yeah.
looked pretty attractive. But then as we get more specific on the situation, well, maybe there isn't as much upside for touchdowns, maybe there isn't as much upside for him really being the engine of the offense, with Richardson and Shane Steichen's willingness to have a quarterback be a featured runner. We saw that with Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's this situation, and where I become really hesitant, Evan, is it seems like
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of hard feelings here. There's a lot of hard feelings.
Yeah.
This feels more like Le'Veon Bell, where it isn't just about,
Mm.
because people, I think, are trying to process this rationally. And let me say this, in issues of human psychology, especially the psychology of Jahmyr, the psychology of professional athletes who know they have a limited window to maximize their ability to create generational wealth and security for their family, for their descendants. Human psychology is really hard to project and predict in this kind of situation to begin with. So anybody who claims they have some certainty of how this is going to go, I mean, that's just impossible. But I think, as it was with Le'Veon Bell, with Taylor, there might be a sense of, I'm not going to shed any blood for this organization, for this man, for this enterprise, or at the
Mm-hmm.
very least. And Tank Williams brought this up after Saquon
Mm.
Barkley signed his contract. What about when there's a minor injury, or is there a minor injury invented? Does the player use other ways to have leverage? And that's hence why this NFI threat comes up. And the NFI threat, and let's I forget which writer it was. I think Nate Atkins said, let's be clear, this is a threat that they put out there, that he was going to get moved to the NFI, but it didn't happen. That's the team reminding him that, the big difference between NFI and PUP, of course, he wouldn't get paid if he was on the NFI. And presumably the doctors that would clear him would be on the team payroll. So we're off. We're out into uncharted territory with this one.
I
Yeah.
wanted to say one thing about what Jim Irsay tweeted, because I did a tweet about it,
Yeah.
but I had like a lot more
Sure.
thoughts
Yes,
on it.
please.
He said that I know, because I know you love this stuff. He said that it's that playing in the NFL is a privilege. That is not true. Do you know how much hard work
Right.
goes in? That's something that's earned. It's the opposite of a privilege to be playing in the NFL. I mean, that is something that is earned through incredible hard work.
Hmm.
How many times did Jonathan Taylor run into car crashes at Wisconsin in one of the run heaviest
Hmm.
college football programs? How many car crashes has he run into in the NFL against 260-pound linebackers that run 4 or 5 flat? How many? I mean, he played through a high ankle sprain that he kept aggravating
Hmm.
all last season. Playing in the NFL is not a privilege; it is earned. And Jonathan Taylor earned everything. And Jim Irsay is lying when he said, "Well, you want to talk about somebody who actually has a privilege."
Right.
Uh, he's lying when he says that.
Yes, it's a complete mind, body, soul commitment to get in the NFL. It takes you sacrifice and eschew a lot of things that all of us normal, at least semi well adjusted people get to have in our lives to do that. And it's just like any other job, it's someone saying, I can profit off of your labor, so I'm going to share some, hopefully share in some ways, share some of the profit. It's not a privilege. And even if there wasn't the NFL and there weren't these 32 teams and these uniforms and these colors and these histories of these franchises, these committed, incredible athletes, incredible mentally tough competitors, there would be a demand for their services in some way. Could apply that somewhere else. So yeah, I agree with that. That's really good. So I want to go back real quick. Hank Williams, former player, and it's great that we have so many former player perspectives. He put out there when Saquon Barkley signed his deal, not franchise tag, but a deal. Uh, well, what happens if he has a minor injury week one? And we saw this with Lamar Jackson. That comes to mind right away for folks where, hey, if you don't get the contract you want, you do still have some power over whether you're going to play or not. And again, if you're anticipating that you're going to have a contract for a new team, like Saquon Barkley, like Josh Jacobs, let's bring him in now too. You may not want to risk your long-term security with an injury, or otherwise, you just may say, you know what? No, I'm not feeling like I can come to the office today." It does. So, bottom line, Evan, is this whole issue? I've been using the word exploitative, the exploitative running back market. I tried to bring that into the hive mind like a couple of months ago. Is it affecting how you're looking at Barkley or Jacobs? Because when Barkley signed, I think there was an exhale in the fantasy football community. Like, oh, okay, he's going to come, and now
Mm-hmm.
he's worth a first round pick. Maybe he's the third running back off the board. But when Tank Williams brings that up, if he's thinking about it, if he's telling us about it, then it has to at least be out there. Now you can say Barkley's an honorable guy. He's doing this for his teammates. When with Jacobs, I guess it's the question again: how far are running backs willing to go to draw the line in this market? So we got Barkley early second, maybe late first. We got Jacobs falling to the third round. How are you approaching those guys?
I have Saquon Barkley as the 12th overall player right now. So I'm in on him. This dude just loves football. And I thought that even his initial comments and the pull quotes that the writers pulled, uh, if you read the context around what Saquon Barkley said, like that, it was. Um, I mean, Saquon Barkley never wanted to not
Right.
play. So I think that there's been a resolution there, and so I feel real good about Saquon Barkley. He had like 295 carries last year. He had only 57 catches. I think he can catch more passes this season. I think he can be more efficient in the passing game. He scored 0 receiving touchdowns last season, so I think that he can do more in that department. And he's the focal point of the Giants' offense, and that's not going to change. Josh Jacobs was a little bit. It seemed like he was likelier at first to potentially sit out games, but it sounds like there has been some progress on that front, and that the Raiders approached him about maybe upgrading his contract in some way. So I'm feeling better about him. Not as I'm a little bit still a little bit more concerned about Josh Jacobs than Saquon Barkley. Um, but I think he's a real solid second
Mm-hmm.
round pick, and I would definitely take him in the
Yeah,
third.
and just to put a fine point on this, and this is as of August 2nd, this is when we're recording this. As of today, you would take Jacobs over Jonathan Taylor? Yeah, I think
Yes.
so. I think that's where it's
Yes.
at. I think that's a good point. Like when the slide starts, how far do we move Taylor down our board? Least past Jacobs when you're comparing their situations. Okay,
Mhm.
lots going on. The fire hose, right? Training camp, just so much. I want to give a shout out to 32 beat writers. The people, they've been doing their stuff for a while, and it's just great that somebody's trying to say, "Well, I'll try to keep up with it. I'll try to catch the fire hose." But there's a lot. There's a lot going on, and a lot of it is going to be inconsequential. A lot of it we're going to look back and say that didn't really matter, but there will at least be a few things that did matter. So I guess the first question, Evan, I feel like I probably have asked you this question before, but it's a good point to start at. How do you go, sift through all of this? How do you determine things that may materially change your rankings and what things you kind of feel free to ignore?
Um, a lot goes into that. I mean, and having written blurbs for a decade at Roto
Mm-hmm.
World, you know, I think kind of taught me how to do that. But it's everything is just has to be on a
Yeah.
case by case basis. So that's a very difficult question
Sure.
to
Well, okay, I'll
answer.
start here. Let's try to make it more specific because Cecil, I think, was the first one to use the term drum beat whenever it was.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
like the drum beat as at least one of the criteria because what the drum beat implies is it's multiple writers, it's multiple people covering the team. It's
Hmm.
not just one person's
Hmm.
observation, it's not opinion, it's not conjecture. And this is especially when we're talking about, hey, this player looks different than he did in years past. Or you can tell
Hmm.
that this player was still struggling with this injury last year in camp. Now you can tell that he's healthy. I think that maybe a player like Brian Robinson. And look, Brian Robinson is not a
Mm.
player that I'm stumping for. If I'm taking a Washington running back at ADP, it's probably going to be Antonio Gibson.
Me too.
But you can't just say it's meaningless that when we saw him last year, he had just been recovering from getting shot, you know, and now he's
Right.
not,
Yeah.
and now he's not, and observers
Yeah.
are saying you can tell. So these are the kinds of things, material differences, and more than one observer reporting it. And I guess, and I like the way you said, hey, doing blurbs for 10 years at Roto World informs this. Some of it is just intuition. And it's another moment. I've said this on the show dozens of times. Intuition's not mysterious. It's not mystical. It's not supernatural. It's just everything you've experienced, everything you've learned, boiling down to one moment, and your system, your brain boils it down to a gut feeling or a yes or no, a yum or yuck in Tom Robbins terms kind of feeling. And as you go through all this
Mhm.
stuff, sometimes you just can't help but notice something kind of stands out with a little bit of a shine. Like that seems important. That seems like something that I at least
Mhm.
have to be open to. And it isn't always about changing your rankings. It isn't always about making sure you draft a player or avoid a player. I think it's more important, Evan, in that first 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of the season when we're trying to figure out what is the beginning of an important trend and what is just the randomness of the first few weeks of the season. So knowing all these storylines coming out of training camp and preseason helps you contextualize those things and know which things are important, which things should you be an early adopter, make trades, do things to embrace
Mhm.
something where everyone else says, I want more evidence. I want more evidence before I want to adopt this as a new reality. You can be a step or two ahead of the curve. So with that in mind, tell me something when I say, what out of the first week and a half of training camp stands out? What's at least one thing that you're at least pondering? What should I do with this information? Should I do something with this information because it's new information?
Well, it certainly began with all the running back stuff that
Yeah.
we've already kind of covered. You know, and then
Right.
injuries. The Joe Burrow calf,
Mm-hmm.
the Cooper Cup
Yes.
hamstring, because the Twitter doctors have been talking about maybe the accumulation, the buildup of injuries that Cooper Cup has dealt with in recent seasons. They're starting to become like a compilation situation. It's like, should we be worried? Now he's 30 years
Mm-hmm.
old. He just got hurt in training camp. Um, and, when he's healthy, I mean, he was the overall wide receiver
Right.
one before he suffered a high ankle sprain in week 10 of last season. The overall wide receiver one in
Mm-hmm.
fantasy. Um, Joe Burrow, it sounds like he's likely to be ready for week one, but I mean, we've got a lot of critical players attached to Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, Ja'Marr Chase, T. Higgins. People are using high draft picks on these guys. I think that Irv Smith is kind of interesting late round tight end too. Tyler Boyd, just a lot of important players attached to this quarterback. So, and I haven't made any moves. I haven't moved him down. Like I still have him right ahead of Justin Herbert, and then I have Deshaun Watson in that same
Mm-hmm.
tier, although he's far back. He's way down in my overall 150, but that's that tier. I haven't moved down Joe Burrow. And I'm not yet sure what to do with Cooper Kupp, but I mean, I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So those are the things that stand out to me so far
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
training
Those
camp.
are, it's funny in my little outline that I had, Kupp and Burrow were the next two things. So you anticipated it. You skated to where the puck was going to be. And I think that, like you said, I mean, on a bottom line, you should not feel free to ignore it. You shouldn't say it's nothing. It's a big nothing burger, these injuries. With Kupp, I always felt a sense of ominous vibes around the Rams this year. Just felt like,
Hmm.
and maybe this is consequential, maybe it isn't, with Matthew Stafford and the team seemingly not on the same page.
Hmm.
We'll see. But with Kupp, I think you were weighing him against Austin Eckler and Christian McCaffrey and Travis Kelce, and then maybe Tyreek Hill, maybe. So some players in that 3 to 7 range. And I think that no matter what we would do, Evan, with our rankings where we're making recommendations for everybody else, I think when you're on the clock, well, I said something on our show yesterday, which is maybe just as simple as, and I'm going to try this out, or somebody out there, because I know a lot of people will be listening to this, and someone can do this. If they can create a data set of players, we could have a threshold like players that missed at least a week with an injury in training camp or preseason, or players, we could even say something that was severe enough to have an MRI or X-rays, right? You could just make a threshold,
Hmm.
right? And how do those players perform compared to ADP? Because ADP should respond to this. I mean, if we're being rational, Cup's ADP, now there's not, I mean, the gaps between players are a lot bigger at the top of the board. So Cooper Cup falling from 3 to 4 could be bigger than a player further down the rankings falling 2 rounds, But even if Cooper Cup falls from 3.2 to 3.7 or something like that, there should at least be some drop. And with Burrow, like you said, maybe you're not moving him out of the tier. And I like that you said, I'm assuming that Justin Fields is ahead of him. I think that's where the rubber meets the road. Justin Fields ahead of Joe Burrow. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, literally one spot
Right.
ahead of him is where
Right.
I have. I have Justin Fields quarterback 5, Joe Burrow quarterback
Right. So if
6.
there was a debate, because depending on your scoring system, Joe Burrow was the clear quarterback 4 last year at the
Yep.
end of the year. Now, if you take Justin Fields from week 6,
And that was with Ja'Marr Chase missing 4
right,
games and T. Higgins also missing some
right,
time.
right. And
Yeah.
then he's going to get Orlando Brown this year, solidify that left tackle position. So there was reason to think of Joe Burrow after that big 3 as the next guy. But if you look at Justin Fields' numbers from week 6 on, he was about the same on average as Burrow was over the course of the year. But again, like you said, that was Burrow not necessarily playing with his full arsenal. And then, of course, we expect Fields to grow this year. I mean, Fields and or Lamar Jackson. We may look back, Evan, and just say, who won your league? Who took Justin Fields? Who won your league? Who took Lamar Jackson? It's possible.
Yep. Yep.
But I think that we have to consider these things. But let's talk a little bit about some players that are generating some camp hype. Just no,
Oh,
go ahead. Go ahead.
let me mention one more
Yeah.
situation. And it's the situation surrounding Dalvin
Uh-huh.
Cook because wherever he goes, he's going to throw a big
Yep.
wrench into that backfield, even if you think that he's on the decline. And I think he probably is. He's still going to be a guy that commands carries in a backfield. And so what we have to we have to navigate a little bit is like anticipating where he goes because he could really affect Brees
Yep.
Hall if he goes to the Jets. He could really affect Ramondre Stevenson if he goes to New England. He could throw a big wrench into an already convoluted situation in Miami. Um, Also, the Patriots worked out Leonard
Yeah.
Fournette. He could throw a wrench into a backfield, although he's not coming off a very good season. I think he's a guy that's going to command snaps wherever
Right.
he goes. So that's something those are things that are floating out there that we have to be monitoring
Yeah.
closely.
Against that third round, right? Brees Hall, third round. Ramondre Stevenson, third round. You're
Yep.
navigating that, and there are players that have a chance to outperform that third round draft capital you spend on them, but they also could be landmines. And that's maybe where you start going to a Jerry Jeudy, a Calvin Ridley, if you're lucky and Mark Andrews falls or something like that. And maybe, and again, like we talked about Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, third round. It's a kind of like a tightrope. And you're absolutely right with the Dalvin Cook situation. And it's definitely one of those situations where perhaps his contract might only be $2 or $3 million or something like that at this point. But his impact on the backfield, he's going to demand touches. He's going to demand part of that backfield. And New England seems like they're still just evaluating Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris and seeing if they need somebody. All right, I want to talk about some training camp hype players and just see if you're buying it or if at least it's on your radar. Okay, let's start with a couple of Moores. Let's start with DJ Moore because we talked about Justin Fields. And I fully endorse taking Justin Fields at ADP. I even endorse taking Justin Fields a half round or a round ahead of ADP because he only needs to show just incremental passing improvement to take that jump up to the Allen, Mahomes, and Hurts level of scoring. It's not going to take much. He's just such an explosive runner. I don't think anybody had him as
Mhm.
explosive as a runner.
Mm-mm.
He's like a Michael Vick level runner, which I don't.
Yeah.
That was not in his profile. What about DJ Moore though? Because
Yeah, he was more of like a pocket passer almost at
yeah,
Ohio State. I mean, I think he still averaged like 40 rushing yards per
right.
game, but it was nothing like what we saw
No,
from him
no,
last year.
once he
That
got
was dynamic.
free, it was like Terrell Pryor. It was like he was out there and you didn't know when he was gonna get stopped. But you have DJ Moore now. This is kind of like AJ Brown getting introduced to Jalen Hurts last year. So you have a legit number one receiver. All reports, even going back to the spring, Evan, were that more Fields and Moore are making that connection personally, on the field, chemistry, all that stuff. That DJ Moore really is that number one receiver. Now the
Mhm.
passing volume in Chicago was a desert for passing
Mhm.
stats, and everybody who took DJ Moore last year was burned by him, right? So probably whoever took DJ Moore last year probably isn't taking him this year because they were burned by him. So you already have this memory, but at the same time, Evan, it just nags at me. It just nags at me that like 2 or 3 weeks into the season, uh, DJ Moore could have like 400 receiving yards, even on like 12 receptions and like 3 touchdowns. You know what I'm saying? And we could just
Mhm.
say, how could we not see this coming? How could we not see this coming? And he's
Mhm.
headed towards a top 5 or 10 finish. But then we could also see him with 8 catches for 150 yards through 3 games and 1 touchdown and say, how could we not see this coming? Where are you at on DJ Moore, a player with a very wide range of outcomes?
So I've kind of adjusted my feelings about him because I started out, and I'll just talk about the whole progression of like what led me to ranking him. I think like wide receiver
Mm-hmm,
17 maybe
mm-hmm.
right now. Um, and I started out, I was like, all right, I'm going to make him a flag plant player, and I want to be real high on him, you know. And I think I had him like wide receiver 12 or 14 at some point, and that's like well ahead of ADP. And then I talked with Michael Leone, and Michael Leone's very, very good with statistical projections, and he's like, we have significant upgrades on the Bears passing volume from last season, and we still can't get DJ Moore anywhere near as high as you have him, Evan. So we had to reach a little bit of a compromise, and I moved him down at that point. And then we interviewed Brandon Thorne, who, for my money, is like
Yes.
the best offensive line analyst in media. Nothing against Ross Tucker. I mean, Ross Tucker is really good too, but um, you know, non ex player,
Mm-hmm.
best offensive line analyst, Brandon Thorne. And he laid out, well, I was expecting to have to see him have a higher ranking on the Bears offensive line than he did. And he still questions their pass protection. He's like, dude, they got a lot of butt kickers up front. These guys are going to be awesome run blockers. But he still has major questions about them in pass protection. And Justin Fields, probably his biggest weakness as a passer, I believe, is that he holds on to the ball too long. So I was kind of optimistic that, hey, maybe this offensive line can take a big step forward because they've got some hits on some players up there. Braxton Jones, they used a first round pick on Darnell Wright. They signed Nate Davis. These guys all excel more at run blocking than pass blocking. So that would support the notion that the Bears are probably not going to open it up big time from a passing standpoint. And maybe they will over the course of the season if those guys show well as pass protectors. But that was a concern to me. So I've gone from having DJ Moore like wide receiver 12 to 14 range down to like wide receiver 17 to 19 range, still ahead of ADP, and I still get him a decent amount. I really like stacking him in best ball whenever I get with
Mhm.
Justin Fields. I mean, because I'm with you. I think that even though we question this pass volume situation, like they could reach a point where they're hyper efficient. I think that they can get better over the course of the season.
Yeah, I think we can look at and AJ Brown as a player we can look at back when he was with Tennessee, and there's some similarities there. Doesn't
Yep.
always take 130, 140 targets for someone to be a wide receiver one. It does not. You have to look at the types of targets, like you said, the efficiency, and I'm open to it. And I think the bottom line about what you said there is still ahead of ADP. If you're thinking, if you're feeling it, you should definitely be willing to take the plunge. Let's talk about another post hype player in Elijah Moore over in Cleveland. And this is another one with a drum beat. I don't think this is manufactured. I don't think the Watson to Moore connection is manufactured. I
Mm.
don't think Cleveland being really excited about having him is manufactured. And I always come back to when I think about Deshaun Watson, I always think about Hunter Renfrow. I always think about Deshaun. That's why I was so excited about Kiki Cutie, who's on a roster somewhere. I can't even remember. I think he's down here in New Orleans, if I remember correctly. Uh, just that idea of Deshaun Watson and his style as a passer. So I'm really open to Elijah Moore. I actually think that obviously I would take Elijah Moore ADP over Amari Cooper at ADP. I might take Moore over Cooper just straight up. I might
Mm.
just do that. Am I way out over my skis here? What are you thinking about the other Moore, Elijah Moore?
um, I mean, so my thoughts on Elijah Moore. Look, this guy was the 34th overall pick in the draft. Through 2 seasons, he's really not done anything. He has generated hype. He had an okay rookie season. He didn't do anything last year. Um, Not that that was going to be easy, considering their quarterback situation with the Jets. But then they really traded him for a song. I
Yeah,
mean, a pick
yeah.
swap. That's concerning to me. Um, we had Matt Harmon on, and I think that he is more on your side regarding Elijah Moore, but he also thought that Amari Cooper had like maybe low key the best season of his career in 2022, and Matt Harmon has
hmm
actually always kind of been a little bit of a hater on Amari Cooper. So I thought that that was interesting. Just looking at the ADP of Elijah Moore right now, and I have him like wide receiver 49, wide receiver 50, and the ADP situation is like he's going in the top 90
hmm
picks on underdog. And regardless of where you look, he's like going in the top 100. So I would say that I probably disagree with
Sure.
you here, but I also think that there is a decent chance that I could be wrong here. I like Amari Cooper a lot again this season. You go back and look at Deshaun Watson, who he threw the ball to. I mean, he was peppering Amari Cooper, and they were good together. And then I also kind of like Donovan Peoples
hmm
Jones real late. I think that he is. He was a guy that when they were talking about maybe going to getting DeAndre Hopkins, like I was worried about Donovan Peoples Jones, but he survived that, and he has. He can stretch the field. He had over 800 yards last season. I mean,
Yeah.
he's not, he's like a pretty good ascending player, just turned 24 years old. And then I also like David Njoku. And I also think that Nick Chubb is the favorite at sports books to lead the NFL in rushing this season. So, there's just a lot of dudes that need to get the rock
hmm
here. And I don't know, that's my
Yeah.
feeling on Elijah
Yeah, well, I
Moore.
think that
Yeah.
there's a larger Cleveland offense take there that
Hmm.
because Watson was just atrocious last year. I mean
Hmm.
terrible. That the
Yeah.
fantasy football ADP, the fantasy football market is probably not reflecting how much, at least not even a return to form. Let's not bank on a return to form. Just Deshaun Watson playing like a league average quarterback. Is it even accounting for that? Is the ADP even counting for that? Because if Deshaun Watson's a league average quarterback, what does that do to Nick Chubb's numbers? Nick Chubb should be a top 10 pick. Nick Chubb should be running back 3 or 4 off the board, probably. If we're just saying that Deshaun Watson's going to be a league average quarterback. Now, if Deshaun Watson gets close to where he was before, then it becomes important. You better be putting a chip on one of his targets. And like you said, we can disagree on which of the targets, but you should be putting a chip on at least one of his targets, whether it be Njoku. And Peoples-Jones is a good one too. Like you said, an ascendant player. I feel for Peoples-Jones and Nico Collins, because I think their quarterback play at Michigan kind of hid what they could be in the NFL, and they're bringing that out now. But Cleveland's definitely an important team to be paying attention to. And like I said, part of your draft plan, whether it's Chubb, whether it's favorite target, whether it's Watson, whether it's 2 or 3 of those options, should be part of your draft plan as we're waiting for the unveil of really this time what the Browns are going to look like with Deshaun Watson instead of what we saw last year. What about Jahmyr Gibbs? Jahmyr Gibbs is another one of these players that I thought, and I just want to signal boost this as much as I can, because JJ Zacharyason's doing such amazing work over late round quarterback, and I had him on a couple of month ago. I don't know. Time just kind of, the older you get, Evan, it's harder to judge how much time passes, right? He said that, hey, the running back dead zone, when it's a rookie in the running back dead zone, on average, they perform like a fantasy second round pick. The running backs falling to the dead zone can be because we've seen them perform. We know they're kind of mediocre, but they're guaranteed volume. So they fall out of the first 3 rounds or so, but they still be running back volume is king, etc. But when a rookie is there, it's more based on uncertainty, and that uncertainty often we're too low on them. So I'll lead in with that with Gibbs, and then we can start talking about the peripherals. But Gibbs is one of those players. You talk about flag players, Evan. You brought that into the lexicon here. Plant your flag. I mean, as long as Gibbs stays, I think I have him as like running back 8 right now in PPR leagues. As long as he stays, because it won't take much, right? It won't take much for Gibbs if he catches 70 balls. It won't take, and look, 70 balls is just 4 catches a game. That's not unachievable when you're the player that was number 12 that you were almost open to taking, and maybe open to taking a number 6. If we look at the history of running backs that were taken that high and how quickly and the volume they were incorporating. And I love David Montgomery too. I think there are plenty of scenarios where both David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are hits, both of them, like a Ingram Kamara kind of backfield, right? So I'm high on Gibbs, but I think this is great to get some differing perspectives, because I'm ready to make him a flag player, but at the same time, we haven't really seen. Have we seen a running back? That's another one of those questions. Are we seeing maybe the top 2 running backs on the board? Running backs more like Gibbs. What are your thoughts as we are going into the unknown with Gibbs?
So we had Dwayne McFarland on, who is really good at doing utilization stuff, and that's obviously critical in fantasy. And they also do at Fantasy Life like a prospect model, and he said something like the 2 players that the prospect model spit out in terms of projection for Jahmyr Gibbs in the pros were like Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey or something like that. Like, yeah. See, I have him RB17 and I'm terrified. uh, and it's because I just think that David Montgomery is going to be in the Jamal Williams role, and they're going to use Jahmyr Gibbs as like a part-time back, and David Montgomery is going to get the goal line carries. And like David Montgomery is just like he's not explosive. He's never been a breakaway runner, but he's the kind of player that, because he holds on to the ball, he can pass protect. He's going to get what's blocked. He can catch the ball. He's a player that coaches like to play because they can trust him. Almost exactly like Jamal Williams. So that's kind of my concern with Jahmyr Gibbs. But trust me, I am afraid that I have him like maybe way too low, because I think that if you're just looking at ceiling, if you're just looking at upside, which I don't have anybody drafting that way. Like, hey, just make your upside
Right,
rankings.
right.
If you're just going to straight draft for ceiling, Jahmyr Gibbs is not the RB 17. I think he's closer to where you have him. Somewhere in that like RB 12 range. I think is where I'd have him if I was just talking about
Yeah,
upside.
or again in that third round where you're like, there's a holdout here, there's an injury there, there's a Dalvin Cook situation here. Maybe the answer is just Jahmyr Gibbs. I love that quote. And I think I like that you bring that up just as a sort of fantasy football analyst support group moment where I think this is where it comes back to like emotional intelligence, right? Like our emotions can also be information. And I think it's totally valid. Like I have this idea right now after you said that, Evan, that there should be some sort of panel across all the websites, all the analysts say which player's ranking scares you the most of your own rankings that you're
Yeah,
going to be wrong.
that's actually a great like podcast
Right.
topic. Actually,
Right. Well,
yeah.
what I have, I put an article out in a couple of weeks. I call it the all roll aids team, where they're the players you hope someone else takes, like Jonathan Taylor. They're the players you took to help someone else takes, just so you don't have to agonize about it while you're on the clock and think, am I really going to put my ranking to the test here? Or am I going to realize while I'm on the clock that I really don't believe my own ranking? I really don't believe it, even though I've been putting it out there. It's tough, but I think that you hit on one of the most important things where anybody who's doing a rational, sober analysis of Gibbs has to say, well, the upside's there. And regardless, the Lions' backfield, I think this is a totally uncontroversial take, Evan. The Lions' backfield is going to be one of the most productive backfields in the league. It's going to be one of those productive. So the fact that the two backs are going, fourth and sixth round,
Mm-hmm.
something's got to give there. Something's got to give. Something's,
Yeah, I mean it's like a bankable
yeah.
offense. I
Oh,
think. I
yeah.
mean, love that offensive coordinator. He is going to be a head
Yep.
coach. I'm actually a little surprised that he's not Ben
Mm-hmm.
Johnson.
They gave him a
I'm
raise.
actually a little surprised. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he's gonna be a head coach within the next
Yeah.
2 years. The offensive line, awesome offensive
Yep.
line. Jared Goff is mid range to
Mm-hmm.
maybe quarterback number 18 in the league, but I mean he's good enough to engineer really productive offenses. He did it last year. He did it with the
Yeah.
Rams. So I'm with you that the offense is bankable. Again, I'm afraid that I'm way too low on Jahmyr
Yeah,
Gibbs.
I like that Ben Johnson. Let's bring some attention. Let's put some praise on Ben Johnson's name because he basically took over for Anthony Lynn late in 2021, which happened to be when Amon-Ra St. Brown took off. I remember seeing quotes from
Mhm.
Amon-Ra St. Brown that said the players love him, that he listens to the players, that he's
Mhm.
he's a player's coach. Obviously, he's innovative. And say what you will about Jared Goff. The one thing we know Jared Goff can do is if you design a play and it's executed so the play works, he'll deliver the ball where it's supposed to go, right? He can do
Yep.
that much. And maybe that's all he needs to do in Detroit because, like you said, there's that line. And I am looking forward to, Evan, the Dan Campbell coaching tree. I love it. I want to see it, you know?
Also, when Jamison Williams
Yes.
joins the offense, I mean that dude can lift the
Yeah.
lid.
It
So,
opens everything up. And I think that they're going to have a
yep.
plan, right? If you look at what the Lions have done, they have a plan. They don't do things. There's some organizations, Evan, where you see what they do and you can feel that there's dissension. You can feel like San Francisco is a good example, right? Where you can feel there's power struggle sometimes, or you can feel there's ambivalence. Detroit feels like an organization that always has clarity. Everyone's pulling in the same direction. Everyone's on board. So when they take Jahmyr Gibbs, when they take Sam Laporta, when they take Jamison Williams, they've traded up to take Jamison Williams. They know what they're doing. Whether it's going to work, we'll see. But most of what they've done is working. So, I would guess that future plans are also going to work. And when you think about the way the defenses can be contorted and the way that they can put personnel out there to create mismatches, no matter what the defensive personnel has as strengths and weaknesses, it's exciting. It's an exciting offense. And then now you have the secondary already a little banged up. So this could be that bankable offense. Let's see. I want to go back to this because you mentioned something about the Chicago offensive line being a better offensive line for run blocking than pass blocking. I had on Matt Batanti from our staff. That's our offensive line expert. He's fantastic. Draft Daddy from back in the day. And he was pointing out that Carolina and Houston both have also lines that are much stronger as run blocking lines. And I saw also that you retweeted about a week ago our mutual friend and brilliant football mind, great all-around person, a source of calm in the storm, Josh Norris, about Dameon Pierce. There's a lot of interesting running backs in that 6th, 7th round range, right? There's DeAndre Swift, Miles Sanders, speaking about Carolina. J.K. Dobbins was in that range. Some of those volume backs like Rashad White, James Conner. It sure feels like you should be taking a running back in round 6 or 7. Like there should be at least one of those guys that stands out to you, at least one. And you can kind of incorporate that in your draft plan. That you're going to take a running back in the 6th or 7th round that you're convinced is a big steal. So retweets are not necessarily endorsements, whatever they're called now. You can start with Dameon Pierce. You can talk about that range of the draft, that part of the running back rankings where there's a lot of uncertainty, but that's where you can really profit. What do you think about Pierce and that group of running backs?
I agree with your sentiment that there are like a couple dudes in there that I think are going to have big seasons, and this is considered the running back dead zone. But these guys are in too good of situations, and a lot of them have already had success in the NFL, so we know that they can play. The Panthers gave Miles Sanders a good amount of money. And I think that, the quotes coming out of camp and really even before training camp were that Miles Sanders is going to be like an actual every down back. And I think that that's a player who, when he entered the league, he was, you knew the talent was there, but he was a little rough around the edges. It was a guy who fumbled too much. They didn't trust him to play in the passing game. And I think that in Carolina, he's going to get the chance to do everything. Um, DeAndre Swift, I'm not messing with him because he consistently seems to go well ahead of anywhere I would take him. First of all, the strength of his game is catching passes, and doing stuff in space. And the Eagles don't have like a high running back throw rate. Jalen Hurts is going to run a lot in passing situations, and the Eagles are going to run a lot, period. They're not going to have a ton of pass volume. And also DeAndre Swift is sharing with like 3 other dudes. So, and also, obviously the coaching staff in Detroit, who we just discussed and we have like respect for, they didn't love DeAndre Swift because they thought that he couldn't hold up to the grind of taking a lot of taking on a lot of workload, taking on a lot of touches. And so why would that change in Philadelphia, where they also have a pretty sharp coaching staff? I think that what they're going to do is they're going to limit him, and they're going to and that's actually going to be good for the team. And that is going and he's going to be efficient. He was efficient in Detroit, but he's not going to get enough work. And he's going to be a good real life football player who doesn't really help anybody in fantasy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He's been disappointing. He's underperformed expectations.
Yeah.
He underperformed expectations as a 2nd round, 3rd round fantasy pick. He was a 2nd round pick, I think. But he still underperformed expectations as a 7th round pick. I keep coming back to every time I simulate 2023, the season in the Eagles backfield, I keep coming back to Kenneth Gainwell. I keep coming back to Gainwell.
Me too.
And maybe Trey Sermon.
He's my most drafted player right now.
Nice. Well, I got him in the Pros versus Joe's league. We're in together, so haha.
Oh, you did.
I took him like 2 rounds ahead of ADP. Okay, one more football question, and then we'll have 10 minutes to go off the rails. As our Alfredo Brown says, are we going to keep stepping on the rake? Are we going to take a Kansas City receiver? And if we are going to take a Kansas City receiver, Evan, which one?
Ooh, yeah, this is a tough one. I just wrote up our Chiefs team preview, and sorting all that stuff out is like difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, none of their receivers last year had a big year. Travis Kelce just took everything. Who I saw you took him in the Pros versus Joe's.
Somehow
again.
he fell to the 4th pick. I don't know. I'll take it.
Uh, this is a tough one. I've been drafting a lot of Rasheed Rice
Mm-hmm.
very late. I've been taking Marquez Valdez
Sure.
Scantling late. And this is best ball. Like I don't want Marquez Valdez Scantling on my redraft season long team because he's just not. He's never going to command a lot of volume. And I think he only had one game above 60 yards last season. But I'm kind of banking that he's going to be out there a ton with Patrick Mahomes, and hopefully they develop a little bit more chemistry in their second year together. So I think it's going to be Sky Moore versus Rasheed Rice for the slot receiver
Mm-hmm.
job. Right now, I think that Sky Moore is the leader. Again, Matt Harmon really likes Sky Moore. He thinks that he has legit breakout potential, and he doesn't really like Rasheed Rice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but apparently, Rasheed Rice has been doing really well in training camp. So that's like I think a critical training camp battle right now. Um, so I don't know. I guess I'm just all
Sure.
over the
Well, the
place.
shotgun approach is
Yeah,
fine because they're so cheap.
yeah,
I mean, they're so cheap.
right.
If you do a shotgun approach, throw some Richie James in there. Heck, maybe throw a few
Mm-hmm.
Justin Ross shares in there. At least have him on waiver
Mm,
wire speed dial because we know he's talented. If you want to say Justin Ross isn't going to make it in the NFL, it's not going to be because of a lack of skill or talent for the position. And we'll see. And, if there's one training camp, Evan, if you said you can only get the news out of one training camp, you're only allowed to hear news out of one training camp, I think the answer is Kansas City because it's not just the wide
mm-hmm.
receivers. There's also the New York Prince out of Tulsa and what he's been doing. And this is another drumbeat guy.
Mm-hmm.
This is another guy. It's not just
Yep.
one Kansas City writer. It's not just one coach. It's not just one player. It's not just one practice or one part of the off-season camp calendar that he has been getting headlines. And I thought there was a really good note. I can't remember who put it out there that said, hey, it looks like with Jerick McKinnon, they're going to save him. Why wouldn't they? Jerick McKinnon league winner again, right? Here's the plan for Jerick McKinnon.
Yeah.
Don't draft him. Wait until someone drops him around week 7 or week 8, and then just pick him up and hold him. But maybe it could be Prince early on, maybe Clyde Edwards-Helaire, maybe Isaiah Pacheco can pay off. He's not quite in that he's a 7th round pick, so he's kind of in that same range.
Yeah. Yeah. He is.
So Kansas City's offense, it isn't going to be all Travis Kelce, but it may be hard to discern week to week. I guess because we still got like 2 events, I just want, this is one that's going to be kind of a cosign. And this is one where I want to say definitively, we're not going to buy all camp hype. We're not going to buy every one of these
Sure.
players. But I think one of the players that's really easy to buy, and this goes along with my Kenneth Gainwell take, Evan. Whenever I just mentally simulate a season of the Baltimore Ravens wide receivers, how is the right answer not Zay Flowers?
That is where I'm leaning right now. I was going to go with Rashad Bateman as the Ravens wide receiver to target. When he's played, he's been like pretty darn good.
Mm-hmm.
Rashad Bateman, it's just he hasn't played very much, and he's on PUP
Right.
again. So and there's been a drumbeat around Zay Flowers, no question. So yeah, that's where I'm leaning. That I would take Zay Flowers as the Ravens' number one right now. Um, they gave Odell Beckham a lot of
They
money.
did.
I was surprised that Odell Beckham got a 1 year, fully guaranteed $15 million contract. That was a little surprising to me, especially from a team like the Ravens. And then I think Mark Andrews is going to have an absolute monster
Yes.
season. Yeah,
That's fair.
I mean, yeah, Todd Monken coming from like the air raid. I mean, that's Mark Andrews played in the air raid at Oklahoma, so he's going to be ripping up the seam, and I think he could score a ton of touchdowns this year. But that's a really that's another team where you want the training camp news. The Ravens offense because there are a lot of moving parts from last season.
Yeah.
It's a big change going from Greg Roman to Todd Monken, and they really invested in that receiver core. They got Isaiah Likely coming back
Yeah.
as one of the more interesting, second tight ends in the league. He looks like a wide
Yeah.
receiver. Um,
I'm glad you mentioned him.
so
Yeah, I think you're right.
yeah,
Look, I think it's a totally viable strategy for someone to say, I'm going to take Beckham and Flowers. because you're talking about the possibility. Now we know Mark Andrews is the number one receiving target, but still, if this is a
Mhm.
fast-paced offense, if this is more of a pass-friendly offense, there's going to be at least one wide receiver you want to have, and it just doesn't look like it's going to be Bateman. I think Jamison Hensley's been covering the Ravens for about as long as we've been doing this, maybe longer, Evan. And he said it looks like Flowers and Beckham are emerging as the top two receivers. Bateman's on the PUP, and
Mm.
not just one of those cursory formal kinds of ways. We're in August now, and he's still on the PUP, as is J.K. Dobbins. So, and I love that you mentioned Isaiah Likely, because he was way ahead of schedule last year. He was a way better blocker than they thought he was going to be last year. And it's not at all absurd that he could, because the bar is so low at tight end for fantasy relevance, that he could be one of the breakout fantasy players of that offense, even if he's like the third target in that offense, which
Mhm.
isn't that hard to picture a scenario where he ends up, at least for some stretch of the season, being the third target. So yeah, the Ravens offense.
Another
Yeah.
guy who
Mhm.
I think could be a factor there is Nelson
Sure.
Aguilar. I mean, that was a great little small
Yeah.
signing that they made. I mean, he's a really good fourth receiver. I mean, he probably the third receiver on half the
Yep.
teams in the league.
Yep.
You know, they're deep, and I think he's going to be a factor at some point,
Yes.
especially considering Odell Beckham hasn't played in like 20
Yeah.
months
Yeah.
or something like that. And
Absolutely.
then Rashad Bateman again.
Yeah.
So I think that Aguilar will be a factor at some
I
point.
think you're right with the Ravens. We need to be looking at the options further down the board and being ready to pounce, because we know this is going to be a productive passing game. And Aguilar,
Mhm.
and even I'm not saying for fantasy value, it's going to be interesting to see what Johnny Smith does, because everything went so badly with that free agent spending spree that Belichick
Mhm.
had 2 years ago on offensive players. All right, off the rails, real quick. I want to say I was saddened to hear that Paul Rubens joined as they say here, joined the ancestors, transitioned. Pee Wee Herman, you may know him as, and it brought up a lot of memories of Phil Hartman, going back to old Pee Wee's Playhouse. And
Mhm.
as a kid, this probably is me going on the couch when I say I watched R-rated movies. I could stay up and watch whatever I wanted. I was staying up watching like Caddyshack and the Blues Brothers when I was like 6 years old. Like if I saw it was going to be on at 2 a.m., I would stay up late so I could watch it. But the first real kids movie that I loved was Pee Wee's Big Adventure. I mean, that movie just captivated me, absolutely captivated me. Still captivates me to say Tim Burton's first movie. Nostalgia's big now. I heard there's a movie about a kid's toy out that people like. That looks like an interesting movie for sure. Nostalgia's big. We're nostalgic. We're nostalgic for our childhood. We're nostalgic for a time when the world seems simpler, maybe not as menacing or mean or something like that. What makes you nostalgic, Evan Silva?
Well, if you want to talk about um, movies like from when I was young, I think I watched Jaws on the beach at Cape Cod. Uh, yeah, on the beach in Truro, Massachusetts, at age like 7, and I've never gone back in the ocean ever since. 33 years later. I mean, I'll go like put my feet in a little bit, but like I'm not going swimming in the
Uh-huh.
ocean. Okay, after watching Jaws, my favorite. Well, what my favorite movie to watch with my daughter
Mm-hmm.
is Sandlot,
Ooh.
which any dad who has any dad, you have got to make sure that your kid watches Sandlot, because that is just an unbelievable. I mean, we probably watched it 25
Mm-hmm.
times,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not even
Mm-hmm.
exaggerating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess those are the things
Yeah,
that make me
Jaws. Don't
nostalgic a
watch
little
any
bit.
don't
Yeah.
watch any movies about airplane disasters. But watch Airplane. Airplane's hilarious.
Oh yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I love that you brought up Sandlot. I think that there's definitely that's a nostalgic movie. There's a movie being nostalgic for that in and of itself was a nostalgia movie. That's what's really funny to me about nostalgia for the 90s that's happening now, because the 90s, everything that was popular in the 90s were just things that were nostalgic for some previous era anyway. So we're nostalgic for nostalgia. But we've talked before on the show about the Cubs and you and your daughter and her love of the Cubs and everything you've gotten to share there.
We're going tonight to go watch Ellie De La Cruz.
Oh yeah, wait until O'Neill Cruz is back too. Ellie De La Cruz is like a one-man show. Did you see the
Oh my
earlier
gosh.
this year that he had in one at bat while the same guy was at the
Yes.
plate? He stole second, third, and home. I think only Rod
Dude,
Carew, the great Rod Carew,
crazy, dude.
had ever done that before. Like you see things now with some of these players, some of these incredibly exciting players. I got to see when we were out in California, got to see Ohtani. We drove up to Anaheim, got to see him
Oh,
pitch,
wow.
and I'm getting
Dude,
chills.
that's
I'm getting chills.
wild.
We got
Yeah,
tickets, Evan. We got tickets on the third base side, so I could see his pitching motion
nice.
open up and everything. And he walked out from the bullpen, and there was like 2 people with cameras walking in front of him, and there were like 7 people around him, and I was truly in awe. I was just awestruck, and I turned to my wife and my stepson. I said, "There goes the best baseball player that ever lived, right there,
Ever.
right there."
I mean, ever.
Yeah, it's something. I tell my wife, because love of my life, Kate, because she's really into baseball. We watch a lot of baseball, talk a lot. Like it's kind of if it wasn't for the Mets collapse, it would have been a really boring trade deadline. Anyway, we couldn't even, as kids, we could not even have imagined Ohtani. We could not even have pictured, because even if you know baseball, you know that Babe Ruth was never a great hitter and a great pitcher at the same time.
Mm,
He never. When you watch Ohtani and you listen to the color commentators, often who are pitchers, they are astounded that he can do what he does. They don't understand how he can do what he does, be
mhm.
one of the greatest hitters in the game, in between being one of the greatest pitchers of the game. Anyway, we could turn this into a tribute. I'm just saying, hey, folks, if you have a chance, if you care about baseball and you have a chance to go see him, go see him.
Yeah.
Probably.
And I would say the same of Ellie De La
Sure.
Cruz. We went on Monday night, and my seats are down the third baseline, and he plays third
Oh,
base.
yeah.
And I mean, just his size,
Yeah.
his length,
Yeah.
like he has like super long arms, and he looks like a wideout.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, if you were gonna make like an athletic comparison for him, it would be like Randy
Yeah.
Moss or
Yeah.
something. I
Explosive, but
mean,
long-limbed. It's crazy.
yep,
And O'Neal
yeah.
Cruz.
I mean,
Don't
I
forget
think
O'Neal
he
Cruz.
could.
O'Neal Cruz is coming back. O'Neal Cruz and Ellie De La Cruz.
Oh
If you
yeah.
squint, they're close, but Ellie's got a little bit of
Hmm.
an edge. Anyway, I'm excited for y'all. I'm super excited for y'all. There's a lot of things to be excited about. I know there was just like baseball talk, but folks, baseball is exciting now.
Hmm.
And yeah, and the Sandlot, the Great Bambino, Babe Ruth, the Boys of Summer, and the Cubs aren't out of it. They're not out of it. They're still alive. They made a few minor trades, but it's the NL
Hmm.
Central, so they're not out of it. I guess I'll ask you one other, like, we're off the rails. It's one other, like, sort of personal question. Because I know that week in between the Labor Day and the first game of the season, the first Thursday night game, like we take off to go to Booker Fest down the coast here. Mississippi coast is actually pretty nicer than you think out there, folks. People, just to do one last exhale. What's something? Do you have any rituals
Hmm.
or anything you do before the season starts? Because once the season starts, like 4 months of your life are just going to disappear.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to Cape Cod,
Ah.
which I do with my family every year. We stay up in Truro, which is like super, super north. Um, we went, I think, July 9 through 17, and it's just so like relaxing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
sure, we do some partying in Provincetown for
Always.
sure, but it is always relaxing. It's just like the way that, because we're right on the beach, and the way that the water hits the
Mm-hmm.
sand, like I can sleep until
Yeah.
noon every day.
Yeah.
I mean, something about it. Like I like get rest.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
we have a great time, but I also get like actual rest. Like I came back feeling rested. And the last couple of years, my daughter and I have uh, drove there and
Oh
back, which is
yeah.
long. It's,
But right
it's like
along, like
18
like
hours. So
90, right? It just goes straight
yes,
there, right? The
exactly.
thruway, the Mass Pike.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And we drive through like the Appalachians or Poconos
Mm-hmm.
or something.
Mm-hmm.
And we stopped at, on the way back this year, we stopped at, well, I just needed to get off to get gas. And I saw on one of the signs, International Boxing Hall of Fame. And I was
Oh
like,
yeah,
oh,
I know exactly where
we're
that
going
is.
there.
In upstate New York. Yeah.
It's in like, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And it was so cool. And it's like it's not huge, so um, we could like get in and out, because I mean we're driving. We could get in and out in like 30 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and that's exactly what we did. At the International Boxing Hall of Fame, they get the boxers and they put their hands in gold. They dip them in gold,
Ooh.
and you can see how big their fists are. And Riddick Bowe had a very big fist.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Tyson actually didn't have that big of a
Mm-hmm.
fist. Who else? George
George
Foreman
Foreman,
had a
forget
big
it.
one.
That's what I was going to say.
The
Yeah.
biggest one, the biggest one was Lennox Lewis.
Wow.
Massive hands, man.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that was. I'm so glad we did that.
Yeah,
It was
we
awesome.
should take little side trips as much as we can. My stepfather was a professional boxer. I hung around professional boxing in a boxing gym a lot when I was a kid, so that's close to my heart. The beach, we went out to Del Mar, North California, San Diego area, and go to the beach. And I think my theory, Evan, is that sound of the waves reminds us of hearing our mother's heartbeat when we were in the womb.
Dang.
It's like there's something about it. And also, I always like to say the waves are about the love affair between the moon and the earth. It's gravity basically that creates that. And the ocean, I get it. It's renewing, like you said, and it's a beautiful thing to spend some time near the ocean. It's a beautiful thing to spend time with Evan Silva, establish the run. You all know that. It's a beautiful thing to spend time with you all who continue to give us the privilege and pleasure of getting to serve you as what we do is our bargain to get to exist in 2023 America. So thank you all so much for giving us that opportunity. You're the best. You're so classy.